Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul from the Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said in reply, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus said to him in reply, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." The good news of the Lord. Perhaps you've heard this question before. If you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Well, sometimes it works the other way around, as this story makes clear. A woman stops behind another car at a traffic light. The light turns green, but the driver in the car ahead of her is on his cell phone and doesn't notice the light change. The woman, who is running late, begins pounding her steering wheel and screaming at the man to move. The man doesn't move. The woman is now going ballistic, ranting and raving at the man. The light turns yellow. Now the woman blasts her horn. She screams a litany of obscenities and makes a certain gesture at the man. The man finally looks up, sees the yellow light, and accelerates through the intersection as the light turns red. The woman, left at the intersection, is beside herself. In mid-rant, she hears a tap on her window. She turns and looks up into the barrel of a gun held by a very serious-looking police officer. He orders her to turn off the engine, keep her hands in sight, and exit the vehicle. The speechless woman does exactly what the policeman orders. Getting out of her car, she places her hands on the roof. The policeman replaces his gun in its holster and locks her wrists in handcuffs. She is hustled into the officer's patrol car and taken to the station where she is fingerprinted, photographed, searched, booked, and placed in a holding cell to wait. She is too bewildered and frightened to ask any questions. A couple of hours later, a sergeant comes to the cell and opens the door. She is escorted back to the booking desk where the arresting officer is waiting with her personal effects. "I'm very sorry for the mistake, ma'am," he explains as he returns her handbag. "But you see, I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn, swearing, and making obscene gestures at the guy in front of you. Then I noticed the 'We Worship at St. Joseph's' bumper sticker, the 'What Would Jesus Do' license plate holder, and the chrome-plated Christian fish emblem on the trunk. So naturally, I assumed you had stolen the car." The two saints we honor today, Peter the rock and Paul the missionary, were certainly critical in growing the nascent movement then called simply the Way to the now worldwide movement we call Christianity. How did they do it? not by writing catechisms or theology books. In fact, between the two of them, we have only a handful of very precious letters that were written to specific communities about specific issues, along with the stories that we find in the book of Acts. Well then, how did they do it? Most of all, by the way they lived their lives, their imperfect, very human lives, spreading the gospel by living it, as much as by preaching it. And that's still the best way, even with 2,000 years of catechisms, theology books, writings of all sorts, buildings from the simple to the sublime, all the ingredients necessary to maintain a worldwide institution. The faith of Peter and Paul is still alive because it is lived and has been lived by people of all ages, nations, and groupings of every kind. Paul called the members of his communities simply the saints. And there have been endless numbers of saints since then. Most of them have not been nor will be officially canonized, but I imagine all of us know at least a few of them. They are the people who live the adage that you are the only gospel some people will ever know. Might that be said about you or me? As both Peter and Paul would learn, faith isn't something you ever simply achieve. It's not something that you ever nail down as a fait accompli. Instead, faith works this way. Some days you walk on water, and other days you sink like a stone. Faith invariably gives way to doubt before it again recovers its confidence, but then loses it again. In other words, faith has its ups and downs. We see this almost pictorially illustrated in the incident of Peter walking on the water. Initially, his faith feels strong as he confidently steps onto the sea and begins to walk. But almost immediately upon realizing what he was doing, he starts to sink. Our own faith works exactly like that. At times, it lets us walk on water, and at other times, we sink like a stone. Also, faith works best when we don't confuse it with our own efforts. For example, Donald Nicol, in his book Holiness, shares a story of a British missionary working in Africa. At one point, early on in his stay there, the missionary was called upon to mediate a dispute between two tribes. He had no preparation for this, was naive, and totally out of his depth. But he gave himself over to the task in faith and, surprisingly, reconciled the two tribes. Afterwards, buoyed by this success, he began to fancy himself as a mediator, an arbiter of disputes. But now, however, his efforts were invariably unhelpful. Here's the irony. When he didn't know what he was doing, but trusted solely in God, he was able to walk on water. But as soon as he began to wrap himself in the process, he sank like a stone. Faith works like that. We can walk on water only as long as we don't think that we are doing it with our own strength. Peter and Paul had to learn that lesson, and so must we. The question Jesus poses to Peter and the 12 in today's gospel confronts us as well. Who do you say that I am? Whether in fumbling words or eloquent theology, each of us can come up with some answer for that. But I don't think that is the kind of answer Jesus is looking for. How does our belief in Jesus influence how we live each day? More than our words, everything we do is our response to Jesus' question. As his followers, every decision and choice we make proclaims exactly who we believe this Jesus is. As Christians, how we live our lives declares our faith in Jesus, who comes to restore us to hope and transform us through the love and the peace of God. Thanks for listening. Please be free to share this with others that you think may be interested. And if you'd like to subscribe to this weekly reflection on the Sunday Gospel, you can do so at our website, which is www.justanother.disciple.com. Once again, www.justanother.disciple.com. Thanks for listening.